All right, so we'll go ahead and get started now. Thank you so much to everyone who is joining us today. My name is Monica, and I will be your host today for the session that you're here for, which is called Advancing Equity in an Era of Crisis. We are so thankful for the sponsors who have made this possible. The California Association of African American Superintendents and Administrators, CAAASA. I always have to plug it. If you've never been to the conference, you should. It's fabulous. And the University of California, Los Angeles Center for the Transformation of Schools put this project together to support equity in virtual learning as we all shelter in place to prevent the spread of COVID-19. This work has been made possible by the generous support of the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence, CCEE. We are so grateful for their partnership on behalf of California's K-12 public school students. At the end of today's session, I'm going to ask you to complete a survey. I will drop that link to the survey in the chat box. And if you are watching this later as a recording, the survey is available to you too on the extended session website. We would still like for you to complete that survey for us. The chat feature is available for you today to ask questions, make comments, and we ask that when you make those questions or ask those questions or make comments that you set it to all panelists and attendees. That way everyone who is here today can see what it is that you're saying. Otherwise, you're only chatting it to just the presenters and they may not be able to see what you're saying while they're presenting content. If you ask a question that doesn't get answered in today's session, then you can also go back to the extended session website, find this session, and there is a button there for you to leave your question and you will get a response in that way as well, because we only have an hour together. And so with that, I will turn it over to your esteemed presenters so that they may begin their presentation.
Thank you, Monica. My name is Ayana Kee Campoli. I'm thrilled to be here with you. And I want to say welcome to all the school leaders, teachers, parents, and other community members who are watching this session. Today, we are going to start with a research presentation from Dion Burns, who is a senior researcher at the Learning Policy Institute. That's my role and organization as well. And then we're going to have a panel discussion. Our esteemed panelists are Leanne Wheeler, who is the California State Homeless Coordinator at the California Department of Education. Tara Turrentine, who is the coordinator of the Education for Homeless Children and Youth program at the Sacramento County Office of Education. Elena Cabrera, who is the Director of Categorical Programs and Grants for Folsom-Cordova Unified School District, and Jevon Wilkes, the Executive Director of the California Coalition for Youth. Welcome, everyone. So after our panel presentation, we'll have some time to answer some of your questions before we close. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dion for the research presentation.
All right, thank you, Ayana. So what I'd like to do is present just very briefly some key findings from our research into students experiencing homelessness. And this will kind of set the table for the discussion with our expert panelists. This is work that was funded by the Stewart Foundation and with data provided by the California Department of Education. And so we thank both organizations. Now, our study was conducted prior to the advent of COVID-19, but the findings are relevant in the current context as we think about issues of equity, learning opportunities now, and what this means as we return to school in the fall. So what I hope you take from these data are the importance of identifying students experiencing homelessness, and that homelessness and mobility can significantly impact student learning opportunities. This is important because not only are lower educational outcomes a consequence of homelessness, but lower achievement is also a major risk factor for future homelessness. So let me go ahead and share my screen. And I'm hoping everybody can see that. All right, so before diving into the findings of the study, I'd like us to get a shared understanding of what we mean by homelessness. And what we're talking about is children that lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. And this includes a variety of circumstances. It includes families that are temporarily doubled up due to economic hardship. It can mean folks in temporary shelters, hotels, motels, temporarily unsheltered. And it can also mean unaccompanied youth. Those are those students experiencing homelessness that are not in the physical custody of a parent or guardian, who can be particularly vulnerable. I'd also like to say a couple of words about the key legislation. This is important for educators, that frames the support for students experiencing homelessness. And that's the McKinney-Vento Act. I know that Leanne might say a few more words about this act, but the key elements are that under this act, districts designate a liaison with responsibilities to identify and support students experiencing homelessness. It sets out the expectation that students can remain in their school of origin until the end of the academic year, and that districts should arrange for transportation from their residence to the school. Now, liaison duties involve removing barriers to full school participation. This includes identifying and immediately enrolling students, even without things like proof of residency or immunization records, if not available. And referring students to key services, health, housing, and others, as well as for arranging for academic credit transfer. Now, there's much more to this act, but the purpose of the act is to provide equal access to the same free, appropriate public education as provided to other children and youths. And I think this is the same principle that underpins how we can think about supporting students experiencing homelessness in the period of COVID-19. So let me turn then to our study. We had two major aims. The first was to understand the characteristics of students experiencing homelessness in California. And the second was to understand the factors that influence their achievement. This was a data analysis study, so we used both public data from 2018-19 as well as some restricted data from 15-16 looking at outcomes. And I want to raise 4 key points with regard to this first question of characteristics. The first is that homelessness is increasing. So what you're looking at here is a light bar, which is numbers of students experiencing homelessness at the start of the school year, actually in October. And the dark bar is cumulative counts. That's taken at the end of the year. And as we look year on year from 2014-15 through to 2018-19, we see that these numbers have been increasing. Last year, there were 274,000 students experiencing homelessness in California. That's around 1 in 23. Now, a 2019 report found that even this is an undercount because many districts simply had insufficient capacity to identify students experiencing homelessness. And moreover, as a homeless shelter rep explained to us, many more students are economically unstable and therefore at risk of homelessness. So in the context of COVID-19, we might expect these numbers to increase even further. Now, secondly, students of color are disproportionately affected by homelessness. The chart you're looking at here shows light colored bars, which is the proportion of all students, and the dark colored bars are students experiencing homelessness. For example, Latina students represent around 55% of all students in California, but around 73% of those students that are experiencing homelessness. We find similar disproportionality for Native American Pacific Island students, as well as African American students that are around 5% of all students, but above 8% of those experiencing homelessness. As a preliminary report from UCLA Center for the Transformation of Schools suggested, we cannot take a race-blind approach to the issue of homelessness. Now, a third factor is that students experiencing homelessness are also more likely to be English learners. Around 31% of students experiencing homelessness are eligible for English language services, and slightly more likely to be students with disabilities. This reminds us that students may need a combination of supports. And fourthly, students experiencing homelessness are much more likely to be chronically absent, in fact, twice as likely. Chronically absent, meaning missing 10% or more of the days in a school year. These rates are even higher for African American, Native American, and Pacific Island students. And there's much more that could be said about this issue alone, including discipline and suspension rates and their disproportionality. But in the current context, what I'd like to flag here are 2 questions of how to reduce absenteeism, supporting home and school stability, and facilitating greater student engagement with the school. Let me turn then briefly to achievement. Students experiencing homelessness achieve at lower rates compared to all students. So what you're looking at here, the light colored bars, is the proportion of students in California through grades 3 to 8 and 11 that met or exceeded standards in 2015-16. That was 48%. For students experiencing homelessness, it was 29%. And we see that these rates are lower for those students who are also English learners or eligible for special education services. And we see that same pattern as we look across both English language arts and mathematics. Now, achievement rates didn't vary greatly by the type of housing or shelter experienced by students in experiencing homelessness. Around 84% of students experiencing homelessness were in this doubled up housing, that is living with another family, friend, or relative due to economic hardship. Around 6% in temporary shelters, and smaller numbers in hotels, motels, or temporarily unsheltered. And as we look across the achievement by that shelter type, we see, again, that all students, 48% meet or exceed standards. But there were relatively small differences among the achievement rates for students in the different kind of housing situations. And the same pattern is seen across English language arts and mathematics. School mobility was, however, a large factor. Let's look first at all students. So if we look at a chart, we see that 94% of all students that were tested in grades 3 to 8 and 11 stayed in their school during the school year, with only small percentages, around 5%, moving once during the school year, and less than 1% moving 2 or more times. If we look, however, at students experiencing homelessness, a little less than 80% stayed in their school throughout the school year, whereas 15% moved at least once, and more than 5% moved 2, 3, or more times. And our methodology took a conservative approach. If we look at then at the relationship with achievement, this here is a chart of students experiencing homelessness only. So for students that did not move, did not change schools during the school year, 31% achieved met or exceeded standards in English language arts, and 21% in mathematics. But you see with each additional move, 1 move or 2 or more moves between schools during the school year, these rates were much lower. Now, there's much more that we could say from the findings of our report. We found school level factors, including teacher stability and teacher credentials as associated with learning outcomes. But let me just summarize some of these key points for our discussion. The first is that the incidence of homelessness is already high and increasing in California even before COVID-19. And these numbers undercount the true number. Students experiencing homelessness are more likely to be students of color, English learners, eligible for special education services, and enrolled in schools with large proportions of students eligible for free or reduced price lunch. The experience of homelessness is strongly and negatively associated with learning outcomes, including the CAAASA scores we just looked at, but also graduation and college going rates. And there are a range of factors influencing this: chronic absenteeism, mobility, discipline and suspension, teacher credentials, and teacher stability. However, it's important to remember that many students experiencing homelessness do display academic resilience, and that schools and districts and we as educators play a role in creating the environments that help foster that resilience. So with that, what I'll do is I'll pause here, I'll stop sharing my screen and turn it back to Ayana and move on to the discussion with our panelists. So thank you.
Thank you, Dion. All right, so on to the panel discussion. Let's start with you, Leanne. So, can you tell us a bit more about the key pieces of legislation and policy that underpin education for students experiencing homelessness?
I sure can. Good afternoon, and thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here for this. You know, looking at, there's over 155 people online, and I'm just so excited. So thank you for being here. Thank you for just being interested in this population. You know, as Dion said, that the Education for Homeless Children and Youth program is a federal unfunded mandate, and it's called the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act. It was first authorized in 1987, and it was just reauthorized under the Every Student Succeeds Act in 2015. And when it was reauthorized in 2015, it really put in a lot more provisions for LEAs. The McKinney-Vento grant program, or the Education for Homeless Children and Youth program, we use those in the same context. The intent is to remove the challenges that homeless children and youth face in enrolling, attending, and succeeding in school. It requires all local educational agencies to identify, enroll, serve, and support homeless children and youth and their families. And when we're talking about local educational agencies, or LEAs, we're talking about school districts, county offices of education, and charter schools. And many of these provisions have not only been placed in our federal law, but they are also in our state law now. So it's a state mandate that all LEAs are required to implement. As Dion also indicated, that the intent of the law states that every LEA must ensure that homeless children and youth have access to free and the same education as any other student. And this is including public preschool programs. Every LEA is required to designate a homeless liaison. Probably about 80% of our liaisons are wearing more than one hat. They're a state and federal program person. They're a teacher on special assignment. They are wearing several hats and don't have the capacity to really enroll, identify, and serve these kids. They're also, not only the liaison, but the school district is required to post educational rights for homeless students, regardless of where they are. So they should be up in soup kitchens and clothes closets, faith-based organizations, anywhere maybe a family or homeless children and youth might be at. As Dion also says, that there are specific requirements for providing transportation to and from the school of origin. We really want to keep these kids in their school, because they say that a student, regardless of homelessness or not, can lose anywhere from 3 to 6 months of academic progress with just one move throughout the school year. Because you're talking about new teachers, new curriculum, talk about the stress and the drama or trauma of actually going through that move. Basically, LEAs are to remove any barrier that child might face. Reviewing and revising school board policies is a really good start. As well as, like I said, posting posters. The Homeless Education Department at the California Department of Education, we actually will give posters out for free in English and in Spanish. And on our website that Dion will share with you later, you can actually download it in 6 different languages. The Act also requires that school personnel working with homeless students, such as bus drivers, school registrars, administrators, they all should be trained on the provisions of this law and how to not only identify, but enroll and serve these kids. So this is just a snippet of that in that professional development. You can almost check off the box there. This act is all about relationships. Like I said, it's an unfunded mandate, and we must work together to identify these kids, serve and support them, and work with their families. We have to remember that we're not alone in this, and that we need to reach out to any of us for assistance, guidance, and support. We have almost 270,000 homeless children and youth enrolled during the 18-19 school year. But remember, this does not include any of your 0 to 5-year-olds that are not connected to a school district. And then let's not even think about the kids that are on the street and that are not enrolled. we are still required to identify them and help them and try to get them into school.
Thank you, Leanne. So with the COVID-19 crisis, state leaders have worked to temporarily house some of California's homeless. For example, putting them up in hotels. How have new state level policies impacted homeless students and their families?
That's a really good question. Apart from the CARES Act, there has not been a lot of funds allocated specifically for our homeless children, youth, and their families. Most of the money that has been allocated that we hear in the news due to COVID-19 are there to assist our adult homelessness, those that are maybe are at risk of getting the virus, that are over the age of 65. So not much money is going for our homeless families and their children. I do have to say that the California Department of Education is working around the clock to help with meeting the needs of these kids, as well as supporting their school districts and their LEAs. We've developed some specific websites in response to COVID-19, including resources for mental health, a Q&A, distant learning, school meals, those kind of things. And homelessness is a part of that. In addition, the homeless education program at the department has really reached out to their LEAs, specifically their county offices of education. We've created some resources and sent out, which was sent out through our homeless education listserv. We're in contact with our county offices of education, which you'll hear from Tara later on, to determine what barriers our homeless children and youth are facing and how can we provide best practices to those counties. So not only is distant learning kind of an issue for homeless kids, but also food insecurities. And so we've been really trying hard to talk to community agency, collaborate with one another, and support our families experiencing homelessness. COVID-19 is and will continue to affect all of us, but it's really affecting our most vulnerable population, our homeless kids and families.
Yes. So taking a step back, you mentioned money. And so I wanted to ask, just as background, how much money does California allocate and what are the key funding sources available to counties and districts to support students experiencing homelessness?
Okay. Well, for the 1920 school year, the California Department of Education received a little over $11 million from the United States Department of Education in McKinney-Vento Education for Homeless Children and Youth funds. Those funds are allocated through a competitive grant process, and that process is done every 3 years. We currently have 106 LEAs out of the 1,800 LEAs that are receiving McKinney-Vento homeless assistance money. So if I were to do the math with the 270,000 homeless kids and then 11 million, that's about $40 per kid per year. So that's not a lot of money that's going out. And regardless if a district or an LEA receives McKinney-Vento funds or not, they still are required to implement the law. And so one of the things that school districts can do now is really look to their Title I funds or their other state and federal program funds to help to bridge the gap for distant learning for homeless kids, help them with their food insecurities. Every LEA is required to designate a specific homeless education Title I Part A reservation funds. And these funds could be used in this time of need for these kids at this time.
Thank you, Leanne. Thank you for those ideas on how to maybe reallocate some resources to support these kids.
Thank you.
Tara, I'd like to turn to you next. In order to serve students experiencing homelessness, first you have to identify them, which can be a challenge. What are effective strategies that districts and schools typically use to identify students who may be experiencing homelessness?
So it's really a multi-tiered approach. First and foremost, knowing that definition. Districts, schools, all staff need to understand that definition. We are responsible to identify at a district and school level, and it's a different definition than the HUD definition, which we use outside of education. So it's important to understand that. Really, we take a multi-tiered approach to look at enrolled students, already enrolled, and enrolling students. Like Dion talked about, we have students who are moving multiple times in a school year. So we have a lot of focus on upon enrollment. We have tools like CDE actually just released a standard housing questionnaire that is a tool that all districts should look at their policies and procedures to have that housing questionnaire be a part of every enrollment packet. And if you have an online program for enrollment in your LEA, do you have the ability for those questions to be in your enrollment that is online? In addition, training staff who are engaging with families who are filling out that form, right? Asking probing questions, having sensitivity to families. You're asking staff to ask families who are in trauma from experiencing homelessness to answer really sensitive information. And what we often overlook are already enrolled students. So we know that students fall out of housing during the school year and during summer months. So really a best practice is you would distribute the form at least twice annually to already enrolled students. You could do that in a back to school packet where they're filling out emergency information, etc., that they can see that form. And really training all staff so that there is a protocol in every LEA that all staff, from the first person typically students see as a bus driver in the morning and a bus driver in the afternoon, is from all of your support staff to teachers trained that if a student should feel comfortable and safe to share and disclose the information that maybe they've lost housing as a family, that staff person understands who the liaison is, and there's always a referral system back to a homeless liaison, and that student gets identified and then ultimately served. And really lastly, another best practice would be if you have capacity in a liaison in an LEA, we know all of us wear multiple hats. There ideally should be a relationship with agencies within your district boundaries. For example, if you have a domestic violence shelter, your liaison could have a relationship with that shelter, and whenever a new student would arrive and move in, there's a direct connection and relationship with your liaison. They could quickly be identified, enrolled, and served. For all shelters, transitional housing programs, etc., that's an ideal practice.
Oh, thank you for those best strategies. And so now that we're in this COVID-19 crisis, are there things that you're advising that districts in your county do to help identify students?
Absolutely. In fact, right now, really, as every LEA needs to ask themselves, because we know all of our systems have been interrupted and have changed. So if you're a large district, for example, and you have central enrollment and those offices are currently closed, how are families enrolling in your district? And if you have a homeless family who doesn't necessarily have the same access or tools as other families, how are you communicating out that they are able to enroll? How and where can they, get to wherever it is that you've changed enrollment? Last week, for example, I had a family in a shelter, and the mom was trying to enroll multiple children in school, and she only had a mobile cell phone. Well, the online enrollment application for that district did not support mobile applications. She would have had to have a laptop in order to enroll her students, and she didn't have access to that. So, I could support her. We know that some student information systems that the online enrollment is created out of are limited. There aren't the ability to have mobile applications supported. Then we need to all of us be asking more and more to have those online platforms support mobile online devices, because that is very important for our families. They don't have the tools. The other thing I already mentioned was the housing questionnaire. We have the standard new best practice housing questionnaire. We should be passing that out to already enrolled students everywhere and anywhere. We know that many of our families are frequenting the food distributions through schools, through local food banks. Can you pass those forms out with information? Can you pass out an 8.5 by 11 of the poster so that families know their rights should they have had a loss of job and now potentially a loss of housing happening during this time?
Yes, yes. So, okay, so family situations are changing in some cases, which brings us to student mobility. So what are some strategies that schools and districts can use to keep students in their original school or assist with continuity of schooling when a move is inevitable?
So really this question, you know, Dion's statistics show us that students are more mobile and changing schools. And the interruption of school mobility is all of our responsibility in education to inform parents and students of their rights to stay in what we call their school of origin. And we do that, Leanne mentioned, by posters, for example. They should be everywhere that parents frequent and in all school offices, so that a parent understands that they have the right to stay in their school of origin. In fact, on that new housing questionnaire, there really is information on there that notifies the parent that they can stay. So I'll just give you a very tangible example. If a parent with children moves from one motel to another on, say, a Friday night, and on Monday morning, they're arriving at a new school, not knowing that they have the right to stay in that previous school that they were at on Friday, then we need the school staff to be trained on that Monday morning receiving school to tell the parent, you know, if you were across town on Friday, your children actually have the right to stay in their school of origin, and that they can send them back and make that connection, they can stay at the school. And then really schools have to practice what, if they do that, they have to practice it, which means if one of their students leave on a Friday, then they are actually claiming and holding on to students, period. That it needs to be a, everyone needs to have a shared understanding and belief that to have a student stay in their school of origin is what is in their best interest at all levels. You know, I'm going to be real honest. I sat on a truancy board for 10 years in a previous county, and I was really honest with administrators. I would see students sometimes, right, be moved on. There's behavior issues. There's struggles with families with lots of challenges who are experiencing homelessness, and they would move to the next school, and it would be, you know, there'd be a relief in it. I'd say, you know, I promise you, we know academically as they decline based on school moves, that student, when they come back to you, will have higher needs, will be more expensive, frankly. And so the idea that you hang on to your kids and know that creating the continuity, communicating between schools, if a school move is inevitable, then is that liaison able to reach out to the new school and say, here's where we left off with this student, and here's what can serve them best to have less interruption now that everything in their life is changing, and we want to try to keep school from being the last thing to change.
Good point. Thank you, Tara. Elena, I'd like to go to you now and ask you if you could talk from the district perspective about this enrollment issue. How did it work before COVID, and how is it working now in your district?
That's a great question, because so much has changed, and I want to thank Tara and Leanne for just responding. So much of what we do in our school districts and our schools is led by their work and just reinforcing. I can tell you that what I'm about to say is really, I think you find first you're following the rules, but it becomes second nature. You start to feel it once you start working with staff, and you become more in tune with what questions to ask. And so some of this is evolving. So before and normally upon registration, which usually in our district begins in January, we get affidavits of residency. Those come because families don't have proof of address or whatever. And so at that point, we do take, I'm the director of categoricals in our district, and I do wear the liaison hat. However, I have support staff of 3, and we do fund them with Title I. We're a district that chooses to use our Title I and capacitate our staff to be able to support our 33 sites. Because one of the things is, as we know, is with these students is they're mobile. They're not always easy to identify, and they don't come telling you with the sign, hey, I'm homeless. So we have to be vigilant. So with the sites prior to, as I was indicating, is staff, my staff in homeless services liaison, Angela Singh, will work with all of the sites. She identifies a point person that gets that information. It could be the school secretary, and and then we do trainings every year. So in a normal year, when we're not going through COVID, we use our capacity of our sites' shared knowledge to identify students. In most cases, it is identified through the affidavits, but what also normally happens is in the classroom, teachers are noticing something about a child or a student, or another student hears something that Johnny's living with us because he doesn't have a place to stay. So it's that second hand, like I said, it's not a perfect science. So you really have to keep your ears and your eyes open. And that's what I can't emphasize enough, how important it is to have more than one person. One liaison for a district is what we're required to do, but we all have the responsibility to notice and listen. So what's different now and after COVID? What I want to say before too is every single family for every year is reviewed annually for intake. And that's an important conversation, because why they might have been homeless last year or the year before, circumstances might have changed. And we want to pay attention to that. So after, you don't have the kids in the classroom, they're not showing up or missing school. So now what? We were able to, in our district, provide the Chromebooks for students. Well, that's wonderful. However, if you don't have Wi-Fi at home, or you don't have a home where there is the potential for Wi-Fi, then what? A case and I think each of us can tell our stories, but we have a situation with a child with a Chromebook who is having to find a place to plug in, goes to the local McDonald's, and the restaurants are not open, so they're outside, and they're trying to get the free Wi-Fi in a close location. So that's one example of so many I can give you. And so distance learning, while it's really important that we push and avoid all of that learning loss during this time, what's really most important, and we're noticing, is making sure that we know where these kids are. Because we don't have them, like I said, they're not showing up to the front of the office, they're not coming in the classroom. And so afterward, it's really important that we have conversations with if I'm a classroom teacher in distance learning and I'm looking at you in front of my screen, I can say, I don't see Johnny. Has anybody seen Johnny? And then maybe follow up with a conversation, not to make it clear, but some of that conversation where it's all of our job to see, oh, we're missing Johnny, he's not here. And maybe through that information, they can tap back to my office and my department and say, oh, we hear Johnny's over at the river bottoms, or something like that. Mom and dad don't have a job and don't have anywhere to go, or whatever. We also think what we've found, and this through trial and error, we are one, like many districts that distribute food, but through the district, and we're serving about 2,000 students, which is about 10% of our population. And what I want to tell you is we have about 7,000 that qualify for free lunch that normally would eat. So that means 5,000 are not coming. So they're going to food lockers. They're probably going to other agencies where they're able to get meals, religious organizations. We don't know. But I know one thing is that when you're hungry, you will look for food. And so one of the things that we're taking advantage of is the food distribution to provide information to our families, and whether it's through the city, and that's where we're distributing our Chromebooks, that's where we're providing the Wi-Fi, I'm sorry, I can't even, the connectors, sorry. But something else I want to share that we're doing that's different afterward, we have a team that does with attendance and due process that will do what's called knock and talks. They come and knock, home visits, and they talk, hey, what's up? How come you're not coming to school? And that really has to do more with attendance or, say, behavior related. We do something called tap and chats. I know these are fun labels. And it's also a way to do more of a welfare check, not so much behavior or attendance driven, but hey, is everything okay? Well, we're doing something now that just began in the last 8 weeks, and we're trying to, work our way. Nothing's perfect, but it's called door hangers. Now, knowing that these children are homeless, sometimes people that don't understand homelessness believe that they're out, under a bridge, and certainly there is that population. There is a population living in their car. There are those who are, in temporary housing like a hotel, motel, etc. But in our district, like many, we have over 70% of our population, 76% specifically, who are doubled up. What I want to say about that is doubled up is not equal. If somebody moves into my house, I can admit I have plenty of room. You'll be fine. Obviously, being homeless is never being fine, but it will be, there could be a quiet space where you could do your homework. You could have a room where you could have your own bed. Doubled up in a 1-bedroom apartment with, you know, 2 families with 4 children each, it's really, you start thinking about distance learning, you start thinking about adequate amounts of food, adequate amounts of sleep, rest, and then add in the layers of social emotional. So right now, what we're really, really working hard to do is connect what I call all systems on deck. We are pushing for kids to learn, but we're also pushing for staff to connect with students. I have a team of about 70 bilingual aides that are making phone calls. If teachers are saying, hey, I didn't see Johnny, let's call, and the languages are really important because that's how we get information. So, and of course, English too, but I think afterward, listening and looking takes on a different form, and parents are communicating to us when we do get a chance to talk to them, when we do get to see them and listen, that they're having a hard time, like around the first of the month, of gathering the items that are hard to find. Toilet paper, you know, clean wipes, the sort of things that you and I could have gone to the store. Even I'm struggling to buy right now. So imagine them when they have to wait until there's a little bit of money in their pocket, which is usually around the first of the month, and all of us have already gone in and taken it out. And now add the layer of having to use a bus system or having to walk or use a bicycle to transport those items. And even when you're picking up meals that are for free, you're still bringing your children in, and it's just lots of layers. So we're really trying to do our best with that, but we're challenged with, it isn't just having him in the classroom and being in attendance, it's all of the layers that tap into A, where are you, noticing them, and B, how are you?
Yes, yes. And so Governor Newsom has us all thinking about school opening up again. Are there certain things that you anticipate for the future in terms of what district and school site liaisons should be doing to connect with students?
Again, I'm going to shout out back to both Leanne and Tara and just this network. And I've been a director for a long time in our district, and the network of support is incredible. And through those networks, you form partnerships with each other, and they say, well, did you know about HEART? Did you know about this? And so you tap into those resources. There was mention earlier of like a women's shelter. And you think, well, these are homeless children. Why go to women's shelter to find? Because that's where the mommies bring their children, or they might have those resources and those connections. It's important that you get to know your Rotary, your Kiwanis, because even though they're not the agencies directly supporting you, they're individuals that can direct you. And so to me and to all of us across the state and United States, partnering with our communities is really important. I have weekly call-in with the mayor of Rancho Cordova and the mayor of Folsom. And there's the Mercy Generals on the phone, number of different businesses, different agencies, police department. And at that time, I get to share what we're experiencing. And it's never a surprise, although it's always so wonderful to hear back. I think we can bring that. I mentioned to them that our families were having a hard time getting sanitary items. We can get hygiene kits like toothbrush, toothpaste, deodorant. Lots of clubs like Girl Scouts and stuff will put those packets together for us and donate them. But when you start talking Clorox and Tide detergent or toilet paper, especially right now, and I mentioned that I said some of our families are really having a hard time because number one, what you can buy is very expensive and the supply is very limited. And within a week, individual community members that want to help were able to provide a number of resources. So that's just me having a conversation, being a part and taking the time to be on a phone call on a weekly basis where normally would have been a meeting. We like to say, oh, we're meeting to death, but I can tell you that it's where I get my information, and that I can't understate the importance or highlight the importance enough with partnerships, because even if they may not be able to provide what you need, they will connect you with the resources, or we can identify a need and the community will pull together. I know all communities are different, but I can't stress that enough. And just get to know, part of our job is to be out there in the community and to get to know what the needs are.
Thank you, Elena. Now, Jevon, I'd like to turn to you. Your organization, the California Coalition for Youth, interacts with and serves as a voice for youth. And so can you describe the kinds of challenges that students experiencing homelessness were facing before COVID and what they may be facing now?
Well, to set some context, we're all experiencing something that we're trying to grapple with. And when you think about an undeveloped mind, think about how much more of an impact negatively that it could have on them. And prior to COVID, you had young people, you know, still doubled up in housing situations, been exploited in some of the most unimaginable, or you don't want to imagine, ways. And right now, with the pandemic, these things have been exacerbated. Through our crisis line, the California Coalition, the California Youth Crisis Line that we run and operate, our call volume has gone up over 200%. And what we're noticing is a lot of young people's voices and their sense of agency is kind of being taken away. And, you know, the reality is it's really, really challenging to figure out how to support a student within a family that's doubled up to support a youth that is trying to figure out what their next place of where they're going to use the restroom. And unfortunately, when people need certain things, they get exploited. And again, not in the ways that are healthy for our young people. And the thing right now that we can do something to mitigate the suffering and liberate them from this trauma, or liberate them from this trauma that they're experiencing right now. So the calls that we're getting are really heavy, and we're just there to support these young kids, these youth, these like even parents and people who care for them. We are there to try to provide as many resources as possible, but it's a hard time, but we can definitely be the solution in having these conversations and sharing information to end this chronic cycle of homelessness, because as we know, it's hard, and some of our young people have been missed and passed for decades. And we at this point, we can do something about that, even through such a tumultuous time.
Yes. And so you mentioned your call volume has gone up 200%. And this question is not on the script, but I just wanted to ask, is there anything that any member of our audience might be able to do to support your organization during this time?
One, refer as many young people, share the information. That is the easiest, most effective way to try to reach our young people, is give them information that's going to lead to resources. If anything, they will have somebody to talk to for 20 to 40 minutes, even 3 hours here at our crisis line, because we're going to do what we can to make sure that young people have a voice, have a sense of agency, and have a sense that there are people that care. And yes, there are systems that need to come together and work together and find a solution to really support these young people. The California Coalition for Youth and our crisis line, we're here and open, and sharing that information is pivotal just to support them. I don't care if it goes up 300%. My job is to figure out a way to get those calls answered, to get them the supports that they need. And if that is the first point of touch for these young people, then that's what it needs to be.
And can you just tell, some of us have already Googled, I'm sure, and found the California Crisis Line phone number, but if you could just mention it for anyone.
That's 800-843-5200. They can call. Chat, sorry, my computer is messing up and all that good stuff. But it's again, 500-843-5200. Call, chat, and we have a chat line for youth and caregivers, students, teachers, you know, anyone who is looking to support young people, we're there for.
Wonderful, wonderful. So one last question. In your experience, whether it's your personal experience or your experience with youth, from your perspective, are there other things that schools should do more of, or maybe even things they should do less of if they want to keep students engaged and support student resilience?
So a little background on me, I've come from lived experience with homelessness while I was in my K-12 experience. And I was also in and out of the foster care system. And resiliency did not just evoke from myself. It was brought out. It was like a boiling pot. It was already there, but with support, mentorship, things of that nature, letting young people know that you care, even just, on Facebook, young people would know it's hard. We want to support you, and we're doing our best to do that. Those things for me are important, and that wouldn't have happened for me to get to where I am had it not been for a supporting cast. With a supporting cast, I had a lot. It was a psychiatrist that saved my life from more nights on the street, and that was at school. It was someone who believed it. So these people are within our education system, they're with our juvenile justice system, they're within our systems, these people that care, and right now we need to find a way to reach out to these young people. And again, I would not be where I am if it had not been for a supporting cast. So finding a resource, I know across the state there are folks who are trying to develop mentorship, programs via virtual, the digital way. And with that and the innovations that are coming out, we got to keep our eyes out for those things and share those things so that access, because we already know there's so many barriers right now, especially for our young people that are experiencing homelessness and their families. And then you also have parenting youth that haven't even hit 25 who have kids. So just keeping that in focus and sharing that information, and really it takes a village to raise our kids.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you. And so I see that there have been some wonderful questions coming up in our chat. I want to thank all of our panelists, but I wanted to open it up and see if there are questions that maybe we could address that have come up in the chat. And so I'm going to turn it over to Dion for that.
Thank you, Ayana. There's been a range of questions come up. I think we've answered some of them in the chat. Enrollment data, for example, some of the links. Just to let you know, right at the end of this presentation, I'll put up a couple of slides with links for resources to the organizations from our panelists here, and it has some of that information in there. Let me just get to a couple of questions. One was, do most districts provide transportation to students experiencing homelessness who are at a distance? Perhaps, Tara, do you want to pick up on that question?
I can. McKinney-Vento, really, every case is a case-by-case basis. If the family is aware that they have the right to transportation, then, and it's a barrier for them, and they have a connection to somebody at the school, if it's a liaison, et cetera, and that conversation happens before there's a school shift. Often transportation becomes, we do support a family in transportation. It could be the actual bus, that transportation becomes defined in multiple ways. It could be the actual bus system that all students are riding on within that district. It could be public transportation. There are a variety of ways. It could be gas reimbursement. Districts have a variety of tools that they look at to support a family. And I think that the question was actually, do families sort of take districts up on that? And the reality is that's why it's case by case. Is it in the best interest of a student if they moved an hour away, or if they moved and the bus ride was 2 hours a morning, for example? If they're a kindergartner versus if they're an 11th grader, it's different in every case. But yes, when it's a barrier, transportation is a support that districts do engage in with families.
Thank you. A second question, which I think is key for all educators that are watching today. The question was about LCAPs, and are there best practices for local control accountability plans on actions and services that can support students experiencing homelessness? And one member suggested priority 5 LCAPs for those that are familiar. Maybe I'll go to Leanne first with that question. Are there actions and services that are represent good practices for LCAPs?
Well, I mean, obviously, when you are creating a plan for your school or your district or whatever agency you're working on, you want to make sure that everybody is coming to the table. And so having your homeless liaison, a site liaison, a part of that planning process to hear what their needs are and trying to meet those needs. So anytime when you are doing your LCAP, you should be addressing your homeless population, even though they are not one of the called out subgroups for LCFF. They're grouped under this socioeconomically disadvantaged. They're not pulled out like your foster youth are. But of course, bringing your liaison to the table and hearing what those concerns are, those issues, and linking them into academic achievement, feeling safe at the school, and maybe even Elena would be able to address that because of her local experience.
Thanks, Leanne. Coincidentally, and you mentioned it in the beginning, many of us who are district liaison wear many hats. And I am the state and federal person. I'm also the LCAP facilitator. So I don't think that's uncommon as you look around the district, and we are all doing lots of things. And so to your point, absolutely, and especially as we're looking at LCAP now, it was just released 2 nights ago, CDE, because we've got a modified LCAP, a temporary summary before the extended deadline to December. There is a question in there that does call out homeless students and foster youth. And so I was happy to see that, as well as English learners. And I will tell you that you do have to be, prior to this, conscientious about identifying your groups. And if you're really looking at data in your district and disaggregating data, you're going to see the populations that stick out with achievement gaps. And that might be English learners, that might be special ed, but you definitely see foster youth and homeless services. And if you're not seeing it, look for it and ask someone to help you with identifying where those groups of students, because sometimes the population is so small that they're not called out. So it's important that we dig deeper in the data, because that's when there's a gap, that's what we're addressing. That's what we're building goals, designing goals to respond and improve on. So, and that's it definitely needs to be a part of your LCAP, and definitely want to involve the members that represent homelessness, the school site's perspective, and we want to support them.
Thank you. And just given the tight time, what I'll do is I'll paste some of the resource links that I was going to present here. They will be also posted as part of the PowerPoint that we leave on the website, and I'll post those into the chat right now and just turn it back to Ayana to round off.
Great. I thought we could end with our panelists telling us what's one key message that you would like participants to take away from this webinar. Leanne, how about if you start us off?
I think that you're not alone, and you need to reach out to all that are involved and try to support your homeless children and youth to the best of your ability.
Thank you. Tara.
You know, I would just say personally that I would challenge administrators to find a family or student experiencing homelessness within their LEA and connect with them and hear a story, hear the barriers. This is a very personal experience, and I promise it would shift their focus before reading, than any reading material ever will.
Thank you. Elena.
Thank you. I definitely support what both Leanne and Tara said, and I would also include that, monitor the attendance, not just for school, but why. For us, it's been I mentioned the knock and talks or the tap and chats. Those are where you have that connection. Obviously, you have it in school, but take that time, identify. Like I said, in our district, we do invest in homeless services through Title I. Not a whole lot, but it's enough that it's planted a seed for us to really visit our sites and get connected and find out where those gaps are and get out there, build partnerships. Part of that job of the liaisons is also to be a part of the community and the partnerships. So that would be what I definitely would encourage.
Thank you. And Jevon.
Well, I was thinking, and what came to my mind is before they were students, they were humans. And framing something that will support them and as a whole person is essential. And sharing, calling it out loud and clear that youth experiencing homelessness exists. They need our help now. And we can mitigate a lifetime of homelessness for our children and youth through awareness.
Thank you, Jevon. So the children who have the talent to discover the cure to COVID and solve so many of our society's problems may be doubled up right now, maybe living in a shelter, maybe living in their car. So let's continue to work together to help these children succeed in school. Thank you, everyone, and be well.
Thank you everyone for spending time with us this afternoon. We know that you have so many things that you could be doing, and we greatly appreciate you giving this time to us. Just a reminder that you can find the resources on the extended session site. Also, if you did not have a chance to ask a question and it comes to you later, you can also post it there underneath this session. And also, we would greatly, greatly appreciate you taking the time to do the survey about this session today. So again, thank you and have an amazing afternoon.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everybody.
Great job,
Thank you.
everyone.
Dion, will we be doing a follow-up to this at a later date?
We'll look,
Go ahead,
we should look
Ayana.
for those opportunities.
So, you know, one of the things that I only would love to see is I would love to see the questions that did come through. And if there is any way that I could get a list of the participants for my own audit reasons, I have to show, you know, who was a part of what trainings. So if that was a possibility, I would love to request that. So
I will ask for you, Leanne, right now, and have them reach out to you with that list.
perfect. Thanks, Monica.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
I want to thank you all for having me participate. It's wonderful to meet all of you and to do this, and what a unique opportunity through the distance learning. And I'm really grateful to have been a part of it. Thank you.
Me too.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Likewise, thank you all. I'll follow up with you all by email, and we'll get to some of those questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so
Yes.
much. Take care.
All right. Have a wonderful day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.